Good evening from the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. We're back again this evening for a second attempt of an unpiloted Sojuz MS-14 spacecraft to dock to the International Space Station just a couple of days after an aborted attempt that sent the international partners into quite a bit of replanning over the course of the last 2 days to accommodate the arrival of this unpiloted Sojuz vehicle that is scheduled to dock to the aft port of the Zvezda service module about 41 minutes from now. We'll talk about what has transpired over the past few days up in orbit and all the particulars associated with setting the stage for tonight's second docking attempt in just a moment. But first, let's talk about where we're at here in the flight control room, where the Orbit 3 team of flight controllers is on console, led by Flight Director Zeb Scoville on the right side of your screen. To his right is spacecraft communicator Stephen Zenter, who would talk to the space station crew if required throughout the course of tonight's activities. This second approach of the unpiloted Sojuz MS-14 spacecraft is under the control of the Russian flight control team across the ocean at the Russian Mission Control Center on the outskirts of Moscow in the town of Korolyov, where they are monitoring the methodical approach of the Sojuz MS-14, with docking scheduled, as I mentioned a moment ago, just over 40 minutes from now. It was Saturday morning, the wee hours of Saturday morning, late Friday night U.S. time, when the Sojuz MS-14 was on final approach for an automated docking to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. It had launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on Wednesday evening U.S. time, early Thursday morning Baikonur time, on a Sojuz 2.1A booster at the start of a test flight of its compatibility to fly on that booster, since it is the 2.1A booster that will be used starting next March to launch Sojuz spacecraft with crews on board to the International Space Station. The unpiloted Sojuz also with a bevy of flight test objectives to test a modernized guidance, navigation, and control system, a motion control system, and an entry control system for when it undocks from the station and lands on the steppe of Kazakhstan under its parachutes, that coming up next week. However, as the Sojuz arrived to within about 100 meters of the International Space Station's Poisk module and was attempting to use its CORS automated rendezvous system to lock on to a comparable CORS system on the Poisk module, that we ran into issues where the two CORS systems were not communicating properly with one another. The Sojuz vehicle's CORS system was operating normally, but the CORS system, the automated rendezvous system on the Poisk module itself, was not cooperating, suspected to be because of a faulty amplifier, a component of the CORS system on the station side of that CORS interface. And as a result, the two cosmonauts who were monitoring the approach of the Sojuz vehicle to the station, Station Commander Alexei Ovchinin and Flight Engineer Alexander Skvortsov, sent a command to abort the approach of the Sojuz MS-14, and it backed away safely from the space station. The crew was never in any danger, and the Sojuz moved away to a very safe distance from the station and began a trajectory, basically a racetrack trajectory, to fly in front of, above, and behind the International Space Station while Russian officials assessed the next course of action. Early Saturday morning, within hours of that aborted approach, they came up with a very agile and innovative plan to have Skvortsov, Drew Morgan of NASA, and Luca Parmitano of the European Space Agency climb into their Sojuz MS-13 spacecraft that was docked to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, and to conduct a fly-around and relocation of that vehicle from the aft port of Zvezda to the Poisk module. This is a replay from Sunday night when Skvortsov, Morgan, and Parmitano undocked from the aft port of Zvezda. They backed the Sojuz MS-13 away from the service module. to about a distance of some 38 meters. They rotated. Skvortsov was under manual control of the flying of the Sojuz vehicle. He rotated the Sojuz into the proper orientation to begin a fly-around, a short fly-around, to place the Sojuz 38 meters above the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the International Space Station's Russian segment. Skvortsov then manually flew the Sojuz in for a pinpoint docking to the Poisk module. The core's system was not required. This was all under the manual control of Skvortsov in the center seat of the descent module, flanked by Parmitano and Morgan. Docking occurred 24 minutes after undocking, and the Sojuz was relocated to the Poisk module, the first time that a Sojuz relocation had been executed since August of 2015. The purpose of relocating the MS-13 spacecraft from the aft port of the Zvezda service module to the top port of the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment was to open up the aft port of Zvezda for the arrival tonight of the MS-14 spacecraft, the unpiloted spacecraft. The theory being that the manual fly-around and docking of the Soyuz last night did not require a core's automated rendezvous system, and the MS-14, which does not have a backup Toru or telerobotically operated rendezvous system because it is in a manned configuration, needs the core's system to basically automatically guide itself into a docking port. About 30 minutes or so ago, the core's system on both the Sojuz MS-14, the unpiloted craft, and the Zvezda service module were activated. They have communicated with each other properly, so the anticipation is this evening that we will have a smooth and uneventful docking about 35 minutes from now to bring that unpiloted craft in and complete this phase of its test flight. The Sojuz MS-14 is conducting a series of small thruster maneuvers, fine-tuning its path to the International Space Station, so-called impulse burns. We are expecting the Sojuz to approach the International Space Station and arrive in the neighborhood of the station about 11.5 minutes from now, where it will initiate a fly-around of about 62 degrees of angle at a range of 400 meters to precisely align its forward docking probe with the aft port of the Zvezda service module. At that point, the automated sequence built into the Soyuz's computers will stop its approach for a brief period of station keeping to make sure that Russian flight controllers there at the Russian Mission Control Center, as well as the two cosmonauts on board the station, Alexei Ovchinin and Alexander Skvortsov, are happy with the angles and the alignment of the Soyuz with the Zvezda service module before the command is issued for final approach. Although there are no humans on board the Sojuz MS-14, still strapped inside the center seat is the humanoid robot Fyodor. The Russians call it Skybot. You saw that humanoid robot during launch in the center seat, normally occupied by the Sojuz commander. The robot will be brought on board the station a few days from now for several days of experiments by the two cosmonauts on board the station before the robot is brought back into the Soyuz, strapped back into the center seat for the undocking and parachute-assisted landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan.
And it's kind of like garbled symbols is all. Proceeding with the data displayed on the...
While all of this Soyuz activity has been ongoing over the course of the past few days, the crew on board the International Space Station, particularly the USOS, or United States Orbital Segment crew of Christina Cook, Nick Hague, Drew Morgan, and Luca Parmitano of the European Space Agency, they have been loading cargo on board the SpaceX Dragon cargo ship that is berthed to the Earth-facing port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station. The hatch to Dragon was closed earlier today robotic ground controllers in the next several hours will be at their consoles to maneuver the Canadarm2 robotic arm into place to grapple Dragon in advance of the unbolting of the 16 bolts that are holding Dragon in place to the common berthing mechanism on the Earth-facing side of the Harmony module. It will be detached from Harmony, maneuvered into its release position, and the scheduled release of Dragon from the Canadarm2 robotic arm is planned for 9:42 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday morning, 10:42 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll be on the air with coverage of that operation a few minutes earlier at 9:15 a.m. Central, 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. 3 major dynamic operations taking place aboard the International Space Station within a 36-hour period.
100 meters with change, and closing in at 4.45 meters per second. Copy, Alexander.
This is a view from an external camera on the Sojuz MS-14 spacecraft, the unpiloted spacecraft that's in the home stretch of a journey that began with its launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan last Wednesday night, U.S. time. At this hour, the International Space Station is flying 260 miles above the Earth, moving from southwest to northeast, crossing the west coast of Africa. In the lower left-hand corner of this engineering camera view, you see 1.6 kilometers, and then the value underneath, minus 4.43 meters per second. That is the distance between the Soyuz and the International Space Station and its rate of closure on the station. Everything continues to proceed on track normally. The Soyuz systems have functioned perfectly throughout the course of its test flight to the International Space Station, and if all goes as planned, the CORS system on the Zvezda service module will automatically guide the Soyuz in for a docking that is scheduled less than 30 minutes from now. Once the Soyuz docks, there will be a brief period of relative motion dampening out between the two vehicles at the docking interface before the docking probe on the forward end of the Soyuz is retracted to basically pull the Soyuz in flush with the docking surface on the Zvezda service module's aft port. That will form a hard mate once the hooks are closed, and then Ovchinin and Skvortsov will spend the next couple of orbits of the Earth, about 3 hours worth of leak checks before the vestibule between the Soyuz and the Zvezda service module is pressurized, setting the stage for the opening of the hatch to the Soyuz vehicle that is planned just before 4 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday morning. We're about 6 minutes away from the point at which the Sojuz MS-14 will arrive in the vicinity of the International Space Station to begin its fly-around. Once again, all of the second rendezvous attempt thruster firings, the rendezvous burns, have been executed in flawless fashion by the Sojuz engines, placing the Soyuz in a position for a second docking attempt this evening that will complete the first critical phase of its test flight, a test flight that will set the stage for the modifications built into the Soyuz vehicle, as well as the performance of the 2.1A booster that sent it into orbit last Wednesday night to be utilized for the launching of crews on this new configuration beginning next March.
Please prepare the 47 procedure. Copy with parameters 0x0 and 100 and 0. We concur. Please get it armed and ready to be fired on time. Copy.
The latest in the series of mid-course correction burns, or impulse burns as they are called, being conducted on automated command by the Sojuz engines. This basically to null out any dispersions in its approach to the International Space Station, fine-tuning its path for the beginning of the fly-around of the station about 4 minutes from now. Quickly, just to note, while all of this activity is going on up on orbit at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center outside of Moscow in Star City, Russia, the next crew to launch to the International Space Station, Russian cosmonaut Alex Gripochka in the middle of your picture here, NASA's Jessica Meir on the right, and on the left, United Arab Emirates spaceflight participant Hazza Ali Al-Mansouri are in the final phase of their training. They will be participating in their final qualification exams along with their backups later this week on Thursday and Friday, and then they plan to fly to the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan September 10th for the final phase of their training that will lead to their launch on the Sojuz MS-15 spacecraft on Wednesday, September 25th. That launch, the last ever to be conducted on an older version Sojuz FG booster, and the last launch currently planned from Yuri Gagarin's launch pad on Site 1 at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. That launch scheduled for September 25th.
At the beginning of the fly around, you are going to be entering insulation. Copy.
The Sojuz MS-14 now has closed to within about 400 meters of the International Space Station, closing at a rate of just over 1 meter per second.
Fly around and work.
The fly around of the International Space Station has begun. Now that we're inside 400 meters, the fly around angle of 62 degrees will position the MS-14's forward docking probe in precise alignment with the aft port of the Zvezda service module, which again was cleared last night, about 24 hours ago, with the relocation of the Sojuz MS-13 spacecraft that had been docked to Zvezda since its arrival with Skvortsov, Parmitano, and Morgan back on July 20th. And as the International Space Station flies just off the northern coast of Africa over the Mediterranean, our first clear view of the Sojuz MS-14. Its thrusters continue to fire during this fly-around maneuver. It's all automated. The Soyuz vehicle has performed flawlessly since its launch last week from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Its first approach for docking, of course, aborted late Friday night into the early morning hours Saturday because of an automated rendezvous system issue with the passive CORS automated rendezvous system on the Poisk module. A good view of the Sojuz MS-14 continuing its fly around of the International Space Station. At the bottom of your screen is the MS-13 spacecraft that is docked to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the International Space Station. The vehicle that was flown by 3 of the crew members of Expedition 60 last night to open up the Zvezda docking port.
Будет включена пересветка в 54 минуты.
The International Space Station flying into an orbital sunrise.
Activate AGC mode.
About to pass directly over the capital of Turkey, Ankara. About 45 degrees of fly around remaining for the Sojuz MS-14. Flying very placidly now over the Black Sea. And again, on the right side of your screen, the MS-13, the Sojuz vehicle that was relocated last night.
And the difference of the view. Copy. Could you give us a range assessment using either range ruler or the squares on the overlay? Yeah, the course is showing about 213. And I would say that based on the size of the service module on the overlay grid, It's very, very close to what the cores are showing. It's about 1 1/3 of a square. Copy.
The reports from the Russian Mission Control Center indicate that all of the range and rate of closure values are agreeing, meaning that the core's automated rendezvous system so far is functioning perfectly, and the communication between the core system on the Sojuz itself and the core's system on the aft port of the Zvezda service module.
We see a final approach flag set on the station side. Copy.
This view now from the Sojuz MS-14 external engineering camera. About 180 meters separating Sojuz from the aft port of the Zvezda service module, which is visible almost at the center of the crosshairs. As the fly-around is about to be completed, there'll be a brief period of station keeping before the command is issued for final approach for this unpiloted Sojuz craft.
The range is about 1.5 squares on the overlay grid, and I can confirm that it matches the course data about 170 meters. Copy. Station keeping confirmed.
And the Russian flight control team confirms that station keeping has begun.
Keeping, the rates are 0.
So all of the motion on the Sojuz MS-14 has been nulled at this point at a distance of 168 meters between the Sojuz and the aft port of the Zvezda service module.
Ready to send the final approach command on Argo. Copy that. I'm ready.
We're in a short handover here between satellites on our tracking and data relay satellite system. We will regain the downlink video from the station momentarily.
The video feed for a second there, so please provide continuous commentary.
And the command has been issued for final approach.
Closing rate is 0.79 meters per second. Service module is taking up 2 squares on the overlay grid, which matches the course range data. Everything is nominal. Copy, Alexander.
145 meters now, Sojuz steadily approaching for a docking to the aft port of the Zvezda service module.
115 meters range, which matches the overlay. Copy, Alexander.
"100 meters now separating Soyuz from the service module. This view from a truss camera on the International Space Station. Good alignment between the Soyuz, the core's automated rendezvous system operating normally so far.
And I'm seeing the outline of the target. The target is almost smack in the center of the Zvezda, and
The International Space Station is flying over northern Kazakhstan, soon to pass over the capital of Kazakhstan, newly named Nur Sultan. Now 70 meters separating the Soyuz and the International Space Station. Again, following contact and capture, the forward docking probe on the Soyuz will be retracted. The hooks will close at the docking interface to form a hard mate. And that will be the precursor to Alexei Ovchinin, the station commander, and Alexander Skvortsov conducting 2 orbits worth of leak checks to make sure that there's an airtight seal between the Soyuz and the station before the hatch to the Soyuz vehicle is opened in the early morning hours Tuesday. A good view of the aft docking port on the Zvezda service module. Zvezda having launched in July of 2000 as the centerpiece of the Russian segment of the International Space Station.
45 meters. 45 meters, copy, Alexander.
And this view is from a television camera on the aft port of the Zvezda service module. This was the same camera that was employed when the European Space Agency's automated transfer vehicle, the ATV, was delivering cargo to the International Space Station.
The range is about 35 meters, by my estimate.
This view looking dead on to the forward docking probe on the Sojuz MS-14 spacecraft as it negotiates the final few meters before contact and capture.
Range is about 31 meters. Copy.
The view from now from the Soyuz external engineering camera, about 30 meters separating the two vehicles.
5 meters.
Good alignment reported by the Russian flight control team.
The crosshairs are aligned, but the target has moved a little bit off center.
Принято. Здесь мишень контроля отсутствует, поэтому после 15 метров контроль визуально не проводит.
After 15 meters, you do not need to continue monitoring visually. Copy.
And once again, this view of the slowly approaching Soyuz vehicle from a television camera on the aft end of the Zvezda service module, right next to the docking target itself.
20 meters. Copy.
Everything reported to be nominal from the Russian flight control team in Korolyov. 25 meters now separating Soyuz and its port of call.
SSVP docking assembly is activated and ready for docking. Copy. We've switched to Baza AR. Copy.
"15 meters now separating the Soyuz from this view from the Zvezda aft port camera.
Approach confirmed. The motion is very slow and steady. Everything looks nominal within the approach corridor. The range is about between 9 to 8 meters. Copy.
Just about 8 meters now separating Soyuz and Zvezda.
Did I call it? I love my job.
The approach continues to be right on the money as we stand by for contact and capture of the International Space Station.
Я ему принесла радиограмму за 2 дня до того, как они ее обсуждать начали.
Ожидаем касания.
Contact. Copy.
Right on the doorstep, the Soyuz about to contact. Contact confirmed and capture confirmed at 10:08 p.m. Central Time, 11:08 p.m. Eastern Time, as the International Space Station flew 260 miles over eastern Mongolia. The Sojuz MS-14, on its second attempt, is home at the aft port of the Zvezda service module, completing the first phase of its test flight. And the docking probe on the forward end of the Sojuz is now in the process of retracting. Again, the second time was the charm, a flawless approach, perfect operation of the Corps' automated rendezvous system on both the Sojuz and on the passive side, the Zvezda service module, following last night's Sojuz relocation to free up this aft port. Again, docking occurring at 10:08 p.m. Central Time, 11:08 p.m. Eastern Time.
Copy, Alexander.
The docking probe continues to retract. This will enable hooks to close to form a hard mate between Soyuz and the International Space Station's Zvezda service module. Again, the unpiloted Soyuz vehicle is safely in port at the Zvezda service module, and soon the hatch will open, and within the next few days, the humanoid robot, the Fyodor as it is called, will be brought on board the station to increase the population of the station from 6 to 7.
Moscow Station on Space to Ground 1. Go ahead, Alexander.
The probe, the docking probe on the forward end of Soyuz has now completed retracting, and the hooks are now driving to form a hard mate between Soyuz and the Zvezda service module.
Reporting and so on. That will be recommended by the ISS flight control room after we hand the floor over to them once the hooks are closed. Copy.
Экипаж ЦП Москва в канале ЗГ-1 по телевидению.
Station Moscow on Space to Ground 1 for video. Alexei, you are go to terminate recording and start downloading the files for subsequent downlink. Copy. And
this now is the current configuration of the International Space Station, the Sojuz MS-13, that was tended by 3 of the crew members of the International Space Station for its relocation to the Poisk module on Sunday night, now safely in place on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the station. The MS-14, the unpiloted craft, completing its test flight from the Baikonur Cosmodrome to the aft port of the Zvezda service module, where it docked just about 6 minutes ago.
Station Moscow.
And we have confirmation that the hooks are now closed, so we have a hard mate now between the unpiloted Sojuz MS-14.
On a successful docking. Thank you so much. Great job. We're going to hand you back over to the front room. Copy, Yuri. Thank you so much. Likewise. Congratulations are in order. Great job and good luck. Thank you and goodbye. This is front room. This is your Glavny. Congratulations to you. We've done it and you've done it. Great job, guys.
Russian flight controllers offering Alexei Ovchinin.
We all did a good job.
And Alexander Skvortsov, their hearty congratulations. A very innovative and agile plan concocted by the Russian management and RSC Energia officials to recoup from an aborted docking attempt late Friday night into early Saturday morning. Within hours, the plan was reworked to call for the Sojuz MS-13 crew to climb aboard their vehicle, undock last night from the aft port of Zvezda with a healthy Kors automated rendezvous system and fly around for a manual docking to the Poisk module, which had experienced a suspect performance of its core's rendezvous system on the first docking attempt, which was aborted. So with the Sojuz MS-13 safely in place at its new port, the MS-14 was able to flawlessly approach and dock to the aft port of the Zvezda service module a few minutes ago at 10:08 p.m. Central Time, 11:08 p.m. Eastern Time, to complete its unpiloted journey to the International Space Station, where it will stay for the next 2 weeks. With that, we'll wrap up our coverage for this evening with 2 Sojuz vehicles having rearranged docking ports, and a total of 3 Sojuz vehicles now at the International Space Station. Let's talk about tomorrow's programming, because operations are not complete in this flurry of activity on board the orbital laboratory. Next up, the release of the SpaceX Dragon cargo craft loaded with supplies and valuable scientific experiments to be returned to Earth for a parachute-assisted splashdown in the Pacific on Tuesday afternoon. First, the Canadarm2 robotic arm will grapple Dragon. It will be unbolted and unberthed from the space-facing port of the Harmony module of the International Space Station, maneuvered into its release position. Our coverage of all of this activity will begin tomorrow morning on NASA television at 9:15 a.m. Central Time, 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time, with the robotic release scheduled at 9:42 a.m. Central, 10:42 a.m. Eastern Time. Dragon will move to a safe distance away from the International Space Station for its deorbit burn. Splashdown in the Pacific, not covered on NASA television, is scheduled for 3:21 p.m. Central Time, 4:21 p.m. Eastern Time, to wrap up its mission. That splashdown to take place about 300 miles to the southwest of Long Beach, California. So with that, we'll conclude our coverage for this evening. A safe and successful approach and docking of the unpiloted Sojuz MS-14, now nestled into port at the aft end of the Zvezda service module. That's it for tonight. Thank you for staying with us over the course of over the last several nights while all of this activity has unfolded. But at the moment, everything is in great shape on board the International Space Station following tonight's docking of the Sojuz MS-14 to the Zvezda service module. We'll see you tomorrow morning for SpaceX release coverage. In the meantime, this is Mission Control.